5 Ways to Kill a Man by Edwin Brock. Part 1. Imagery. This poem is written in 5 parts, 5 stanzas, and each part, each stanza, describes a way to kill a man. I'd like to look in detail at each of those 5 ways. You might want to pause the video at the end of each stanza before going ahead and seeing the image that I suggest. There are many cumbersome ways to kill a man. You can make him carry a plank of wood to the top of a hill and nail him to it. To do this properly, you require a crowd of people wearing sandals, a cock that crows, a cloak to dissect, a sponge, some vinegar, and 1 man to hammer the nails home. As I say, you might want to pause the video here for a minute just to think about it. But something like this is probably the picture that will come to mind. If you come from a Christian country, or you know something about the Bible story of Christ's crucifixion, then that should be fairly straightforward. But if you come from a different culture, you might find it more difficult to visualize. So let's look at the second stanza. Or you can take a length of steel, shaped and chased in a traditional way, and attempt to pierce the metal cage he wears. But for this you need white horses, English trees, men with bows and arrows, at least 2 flags, a prince, and a castle to hold your banquet in. Once again, the cultural context is very important. As a hint, you'd need to know something about the European Middle Ages. So, the second stanza describes the jousting tournaments of the Middle Ages. And so to the next stanza. Dispensing with nobility, you may, if the wind allows, blow gas at him. But then you need a mile of mud sliced through with ditches, not to mention black boots, bomb craters, more mud, a plague of rats, a dozen songs, and some round hats made of steel. And again, you'd need some cultural context to be able to make sense of that. If you had that context, you would probably come up with this. Trench warfare during World War I. So, the next stanza. In an age of aeroplanes, you may fly miles above your victim and dispose of him by pressing 1 small switch. All you then require is an ocean to separate you, 2 systems of government, a nation's scientists, several factories, a psychopath, and land that no one needs for several years. You're probably getting an idea of where this poem is going by now, and the next picture is perhaps easier to envisage because it's part of the cultural territory of all of us. That's right, he's talking about nuclear warfare. And so to the final lines of the poem. These are, as I began, cumbersome ways to kill a man. Simpler, direct, and much more neat is to see that he is living somewhere in the middle of the 20th century and leave him there. And this one is perhaps the easiest to imagine in some ways, but in other ways it's the hardest of all. For the 5th way of killing a man, the poet suggests you don't actually kill him, you leave him where he is, in the middle of the 20th century, which is when the poem was written. But how could that be a way of killing a man? Continue watching to find out. 5 Ways to Kill a Man by Edwin Brock, Part 2, Tensions. I'd like to talk about the way that Edwin Brock contrasts positive and negative elements in this poem. There's a kind of balance between positive and negative, and obviously the cumbersome ways to kill a man are being presented in a negative light. And those four ways, as we've seen, are crucifixion, jousting, gassing, and nuclear bombs. And what's apparently being presented as a positive alternative to that, a simpler, direct, and much more neat way of killing a man, is just to leave him in the middle of the 20th century. So, at that level, there seems to be a contrast between inefficient, cumbersome ways of killing a man and a more efficient way, which is just to leave him in the middle of the 20th century, which was when the poem was written. Well, that's all very well, but it leaves us with a couple of problems. The first problem is that it's not clear in what sense just leaving a man is a way of killing him. It won't kill him in the way that crucifixion or gas will kill him. Perhaps the poet is saying that living in the middle of the 20th century will kill not his body, but his spirit. But that leads to another problem. Surely the poet can't be saying that killing a man's spirit is a good thing. He can't really be suggesting, can he, that killing a man's body is bad, but killing a man's spirit is good? I mean, he can't really believe that unless he's some kind of dangerous lunatic, surely. The only other thing I can think of is that maybe the progression just keeps on going from bad to worse. Killing the body is bad, killing the spirit is even worse, in which case there's pretty much nothing on the positive side as far as one can see. So if we see it in that way, the poem does seem to make a kind of sense, but it's not really very cheerful. It just shows human evolution, our life on this planet, as a process of putting more and more effort into destruction and killing each other. So, what do you think? Do you think that's what the poem is saying? And if so, do you think that's a fair judgment of humanity? Five Ways to Kill a Man by Edwin Brock. Part 3. The Poetic Voice. Okay, now I'd like to take a look at the poetic voice inside Brock's poem. Or, to put it another way, I'd like to show how we know that he's being ironic. We've seen how the poem progresses through more and more complex ways of killing, and seems to end up saying that modern society has developed a much simpler way, which is to kill the spirit rather than the body. But that only works if we assume the poet is being ironic. How can we confirm that the poem was written with an ironic intent? To do that, we need to take a closer look at the poet's voice. Let's take the first stanza. There's one word here that I would pick out as pointing very clearly towards an ironic intent on the part of the poet. If you like, why not stop the video just for a minute and look at that first stanza and think, which word am I going to choose? So, what do you think? Did you guess properly? The idea that it could ever be proper to nail a human being to a piece of wood and leave him to die is clearly shocking. And it's this mismatch between the word proper and the act of crucifixion that serves as a hint that the author is being ironic. And that whole list of things that the poet says are required also seems ironic. It seems ironic that many of the things on that list aren't really necessary. Strictly speaking, people wearing sandals and cocks that crow, although they're part of the crucifixion story of Christ in the Bible, are not really necessary, not really essential. And in the fourth stanza, there are even clearer indications of irony. Again, I'm going to focus on one particular word, and if you want to stop the video and think what that word might be, then now's the time to do it. And this time the word that attracts my attention is that word psychopath. In order to kill in the way described in this stanza, you need a psychopath, a dangerous madman. Now, this use of the word psychopath in the fourth stanza is an even surer sign than proper in the first stanza that the poet is being ironic. We suppose that the psychopath is needed to press the button that's going to activate the bombs, and the poet is clearly stating here that only a person who is mad and dangerous would actually do such a thing. So that's pretty inescapable irony. Nobody would seriously recommend a dangerous madman. We've also got a list of things, this time introduced by the expression "all you then require," but then it's an almost impossible list of things. In fact, the ways of killing are getting more and more complex and difficult as the poem progresses. Getting a bit of wood and a crowd of people to crucify someone is easier than getting a castle for jousting, which is easier in turn than getting miles of mud and blowing gas at people in helmets. The nuclear option is the most cumbersome of all, requiring aeroplanes, systems of government, sophisticated technology, and so on. So, saying "all you then require" as if it wasn't a big deal is a further sign that the poet's intent is ironic. It's pretty much impossible, isn't it, to suppose that the writer intends expressions like "to do this properly" or "all you then require is a psychopath" to be taken seriously. The only way to understand the poetic voice in this poem is by supposing it to be ironic. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and check out my other videos on poetry, drama and the novel, as well as videos on English language, history and other topics.